Over the last weeks, we saw here in Brazil more discussions regarding Brazilian imports of some products that come from Russia, and one of them is diesel. Is one of the products that we most import from Russian suppliers. Nowadays, around 60% of the diesel that we import here in Brazil comes from Russia. So they are our major supplier. And as we saw the US government trying to discuss uh, the possibility of imposing retaliatory tariffs over the countries that negotiate Russian products, we see that Brazil came on the lights of the world as we saw that uh, our market here started to discuss the possibility to substitute Russian diesel in the near term. And this discussion started to grow over the recent weeks. Just to contextualize everyone, so nowadays, although Brazil is one of the biggest producers of crude oil around the world, we rank among the top 10 producers of crude oil. We do not have the capacity to refine all the fuels that we consume here. So nowadays, around 30% of the diesel that we demand in Brazil come from abroad. And that's something interesting because what we saw over the last years was a big change over Brazil's diesel origins. As I mentioned, nowadays around 60% of what we import comes from Russia. We have around 25% coming from the United States, and the rest comes from smaller suppliers, mainly India and countries from the Middle East. But that wasn't the scenario that we saw before the beginning of the war in East Europe. So what we saw mainly on 2021, for example, is that around 50% of what we imported came from US, which was our biggest supplier. The reason behind this is um, mostly logistic. So what you see is that logistic works better with if we import diesel from the American Gulf, for example. And also historically, US has been our biggest supplier over the years. But as I mentioned before the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine, around 20% came from India, and around 10% came from countries from Middle East. But after the beginning of the war, we saw a big turn on our imports profiles. This has some reasons behind. The first reason is that as the war started, we saw a reduction over Europeans' acquisitions of diesel that came from Russia as a part of their strategy to reduce the profits that Russia had with the crude oil market. So we saw that Russia started to look for other markets that were dependent on imported diesel. They found in Brazil their second biggest market behind only Turkey. As Brazil tried to work with better prices of the diesel that was imported. So in order to make that, Russia started to reduce their prices and to create a big spread between what they sold and the other references around the world. So we saw this financial attractivity calling the Brazilian importers, and this helped to make their share bigger over the years. Yeah, so nowadays they are our biggest suppliers. Uh, and also something that we saw is that United States, as an effort to reduce Europe dependence on Russian gas, Russian diesel, we saw that they started to move more of their diesel to European countries, and this helped to make this move, this logistical move, where Russia started to put more cargoes in Latin America. United States tried to direct their diesel to the European continent. So nowadays we have this scenario where Brazil continues to import Russian diesel, regardless the threats that we had from U.S. government. And one of the discussions here is how hard is for Brazil to diverse more their suppliers. I think this is the biggest challenge because what we see today is that there are two reasons behind Brazil's difficulties to do this, to do this movement. One of them is regarding the logistical, the world logistical nowadays. As I mentioned, we saw more American diesel going to the European continent, and we saw that these markets was as they flow more cargoes to Europe, we saw that they had less products available for other regions. And one of the second reason is that nowadays we are passing through a market where the inventories on US and on Europe are lower when compared to years before. So what we see is a tighter market, looking for on a global perspective, and at the same time a change on the logistical, on the world logistical, uh, on the world logistical, how the logistics works, diesel market on a global level. So because of that, Brazil is facing a lot of challenge to make this movement to acquire diesel from other regions. And so for the next weeks, what we are going to see is how the Brazilian market will respond to those threats of the retaliatory tariffs. Um, in my perspective, it will be really hard for us to make this movement of reducing the Russian diesel that we import here on the near term, because as I mentioned, we already have a change on the structure of logistics, and at the same time we face a tighter market that make us incapable to look for other suppliers around the world. At the same time, diesel demand in Brazil is increasing. So for the last 9 years, we saw um, increase in our diesel consumption as economical activities here in Brazil continues to grow. So what we see and what we face is, although we have more difficulties to acquire this diesel that is imported, at the same time we are facing as well um, more demand coming from Brazil. So because of this, I think we will face a lot of uh, tasks and difficulties in order to try to acquire diesel from other regions than Russia. Nowadays, I think that's the main discussions we have here. As I mentioned, we will see over the next weeks how it's going to work, this evolution of the diesel imports in Brazil, and how will be the pressure as well, not only from US but also from European Union countries, for the countries that negotiate Russian products to diversify their origins. I think that's it. If you have any more questions, I will be available and I will update you as we see the development of those discussions.